I could imagine. But so I'm personally comfortable with doing things like that. And I think that's something that for different communities and different community developers, that's up for you to decide. And so, yeah, that's just there's a lot of room for sort of personal flexibility there.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that too. And I think it really kind of ties in because you mentioned, some of the positive results you've had in that and kind of ways that it's benefited your approach, and then of course the overall tone and environment of your community. So what would you kind of attribute that to? Like if you were to break down why it works, what would that kind of look like?
Oh gosh, that's a tough question. I think, why does that work? I mean, as much as I can, I try to go into every interaction I have with people, assuming positive intent. Again, there are going to be cases in which I see people in our community or new people in our community where I'm like, this is definitely a troll. I'm gonna, be rid of them. But with a lot of the sort of gray areas or people who perhaps like are trying to interact but are rubbing people the wrong way, I really do my best to assume positive intent and try to be as empathetic and patient with them as possible. I think sometimes what we can forget, especially if we're like I'm not super young, so sometimes I forget that a lot of people who play games and interact in our Discord and on our channels are like kids. And I think that's really important, is that we have to remember we don't know the background of our community members a lot of the time. We don't know what they're coming with, in terms of their emotional state. We don't know how old they are, if they have been taught how to interact online very well. Being as a middle school educator, I was super surprised to learn how my students would know how to be online in a lot of the spaces, but they would not know like a lot of internet etiquette. And so, it was just very interesting for me as a teacher to know that, and then to go into online spaces and see it in action daily. So I think, I think empathy and patience are two of the reasons why a lot of this has worked the way it has. And again, to be totally honest, I think we're lucky because we're a smaller studio. So the scale is small enough that as a single person, I can do that. And that the games that we make have attracted people who generally are kinder. I really think like the games that we make have helped foster a community of folks who are quite like-minded.
That's awesome to hear too. And I'm glad that's the case, and that we're seeing a lot more of it too. But that's just great to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it coincides so much with like some of the benefits of indie games in general. Is that like when you have that level of I've often heard it described as intimacy with your audience. You have this opportunity to create these really kind of empathetic environments. Like, of course, there is always a business component to games. It's still something people are aiming to get in people's hands. But, we have this kind of special vantage point that allows us to really appreciate the craft on the same level with everyone. No, I know that you mentioned approaching everything with kind of assuming positive intent, and that even that your approach to handling these types of things has been evolving over time. So what would you say are skills that you have kind of learned and developed, and things that you've most noticed perhaps improving within yourself pertaining to community development?
I think the thing that I have improved on the most, that I'm very happy has improved, and it honestly happened quickly because you kind of have to, is learning when to just say enough is enough and just kicking people. Before I worked at Rose City Games, I did a lot of freelance. I worked for other communities and kind of helped with social media and different social channels. as well as learning through my own content creation, which has honestly been a great training ground for seeing what works and what doesn't when facilitating a community. And early on, there's always, especially if you have a smaller community, sometimes you can feel like, oh, well, maybe I'll just keep these people who are not being, not modeling the behaviors that we want in our community, that we are excited about for our community, but our community is small, so maybe we'll just keep them around because they're participating and they're at least talking. And I think that's such a dangerous trap to fall into. And that's something that over the years I've learned just to become a little bit, not more free with the banhammer necessarily, but to really know your own limits and know what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not. Because that's also going to be different for each community. With our Discord, we're pretty family friendly. And so we try to not keep tons of like not safe for work stuff or any not safe for work things on there. But other communities, that have maybe spicier games are totally cool with that. And that's totally fine. But I think for myself, just learning what I'm okay with and what I'm not, so that I can be clear to other people. Because that's the hard part, is that if you as a community person don't know what you're okay with, then your community isn't going to know, and that's when situations get kind of messy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent point. Clarity and kind of delivering that information directly is everything. And even if you don't always get the response you want, I think one thing we find more often than not is that a lot of people just appreciate the honesty. Yes, they want to know
exactly.
What and why.
Just going to say that.
Yeah. Well, and what's nice is that like what or what you're willing to sort of accept in terms of behavior, or like what you're hoping for in your community may evolve. And I think what's kind of nice, especially as an indie studio, is that we have the room and the flexibility. For me, especially as a, I'm still learning how to do what I do, because what we do changes every day. And so what's nice is there is the room, and people are usually totally okay with you saying, hey, this happened. As a result, we are going to modify these expectations because we learned a thing. And being willing to admit that also is something that for some people can be kind of rough, because you don't want to ever like feel like you're wrong or that you messed up. But that also is just really important to know that as if you're running a community and helping facilitate a community, you're going to continuously, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to have to adjust on the fly sometimes. And that's totally fine.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I think, this has been kind of an excellent discussion about all of the facets of managing the challenges and setting the tone and expectation and building those relationships. And perhaps to kind of end on a lighthearted note, or transition, I guess, into kind of our closing area here. What would you say is kind of your favorite part about this role?
Oh man, of course it's the people. It's funny because I'm quite introverted. I don't, it takes me a lot of energy to go out and go places and do things, but I do love people. And so what's really nice is that I don't necessarily feel like I have to go out and exert a ton of energy to really enjoy the community. And it doesn't drain me as much as hanging out IRL sometimes does. But yeah, the people who we've gotten to experience both in the Rose City Discord and on our live streams have been wonderful. We have some amazing pixel artists in there who just are so proud to show off their work. And I don't know if they understand how much it really makes my day that they're excited to show off what they do in there, but it does make my day that they pop in and share the stuff they're working on. Being able to see folks also interact with one another. And again, going back to, I want them to enjoy interacting with us, but I also want them to enjoy interacting with one another. We have, of course, Animal Crossing channel in our Discord. And it's just so neat to see people in there, exchanging bell prices or for their turnips, the stock market. And we had an Animal Crossing night where we just visited each other's islands. And so things like that just make me really like happy and excited because it's just good people like spending time with one another, and that's like all you could ask for.
And I'm curious too, and I'm sure there's lots of occasions that come up, like you said with the pixel artist, that you share this with the rest of the team. So what does that also do for the morale of the rest of the studio?
Oh, it's so awesome. Like, I think what's really, really nice is, I mean, even just, it doesn't have to be fan art, but one of the ways we most often see sort of appreciation was when folks do like fan art or they write a comment in the Discord. And it really does just kind of bolster everyone, because when you're developing a game, you kind of get lost in the weeds, and you also tend to focus on the things that need to be fixed. And so you kind of forget sometimes, like, what's the point? Why are we doing this? Is
Right.
this even fun? All this is bugs. But it's not. And it's really nice to see folks in the community get excited about something. Like if we tweet a picture and they comment in the Discord like, oh, those characters look really fun. Like even something as small as that just can like make our day. And I totally blanked on mentioning this, and this is something, again, that depends on the studio, but what's been super helpful for our community is that like everyone from our studio is in the Discord. And so I'm the most frequent participant in Discord, but they see everything that happens and they'll participate and jump in as well. And the developers are the ones who are live streaming our content. They're live streaming the development and art. And I think that's what's been really helpful in like humanizing a lot of what goes on behind the scenes in making the game.
Yeah, that's excellent. Wow. And yeah, I think what you were saying earlier, especially about like people kind of learning to interact with each other and having it be a place where they go to do things like just talk about Animal Crossing and play games together and stuff like that. You'd mentioned, when we were talking about perhaps challenging community members, people never really knowing what someone's coming in with or what they're coming from. Mm-hmm. And so on kind of the positive end of that, having an environment where maybe they can kind of put some of that stuff away and just focus on experiencing a game or learning about a thing they're interested in, or just having people to talk to. Yeah, that's a pretty powerful thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the power of the internet and online communities. It's great.
Yeah, now we definitely had a pretty good discussion pertaining to all of this, but really looking to kind of boil it down. If you had to maybe give between like 3 to 5 points, like things you'd recommend to people looking to get into this field, specifically the community development side, or even solo devs who kind of are managing their community as they're building their game, that sort of thing. Like, what are some things you'd recommend just for people just getting started?
Ooh, okay. I would say, for like going back to expectations, know what you're wanting from the community, what you're hoping for, and not just like, I hope that people like my game and buy it, but like, what is the tone and the mood that you hope people take away from your studio and your game, and try to understand that before starting your community if you can. But if you've already started a community, kind of refining that and making sure that it's clear to them what kind of tone you want to set. I would say, oh gosh, this is so tough. I don't know if you can learn patience. But I think, well, one thing that I try to think about a lot, and this sort of influences a lot of how I just interact with people in general. But one thing that I read when I was studying to become a teacher is that students did not care if their teacher was cool necessarily. They did not necessarily care if their teacher knew the most about the topic that they were teaching. The one thing that students really cared about when it came down to it was their teacher nice? Were they a kind person? And I think for me, what I kind of think about as like a guiding principle of like everything I do, but especially in community stuff, is like, be a kind person. And I think hopefully with that comes the elements of patience and empathy so that you can hopefully facilitate like positive interactions in your space.